Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take interesting sources and, well, dive deep into them, pulling out the key ideas for you. Today, we're looking at a story from ancient Buddhist texts. It's called the Kāṇamātā Vatthu.
That's right, the story of Kāṇamātā.
Yeah. We've got some source material here, some Pali, some English translations to help us sort of unpack it all.
We want to understand what happened, how people reacted, the lessons learned.
Exactly. What's the heart of this old story? That's our mission today.
Okay, so where does it start? Well, it begins with Kāṇamātā. She's preparing food, cakes, actually.
Cakes, okay.
Yeah, to send with your daughter, Kata, to her husband's family. Seems pretty normal, right? An act of care.
Sounds straightforward, but I guess something happens.
Oh, yes. This is where it gets interesting. On 4 different occasions, just as the food is ready.
4 times.
4 times, yeah. Each time, she ends up offering the food to a different monk who comes by.
Okay, so she makes the cakes for the family, but gives them away to monks instead. 4 times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, you might think, oh, that's generous, but it actually kicks off a whole sequence of events.
Why do you think the text makes such a point of saying 4 times? Is there something about the repetition?
That's a good question. I think the repetition probably highlights that this wasn't just a one-off thing. It became maybe a pattern.
A pattern that got noticed.
Yes. And maybe that pattern is what led to the Buddha establishing a specific monastic rule. The text mentions the Vinaya.
The Vinaya. That's the code of conduct for monks and nuns, right?
Precisely.
Yes.
So it's fascinating, isn't it, how the actions of a layperson, like Kāṇamātā, could actually influence the rules for the monastic community.
It really shows that connection, that interplay. Okay, so that's one part. But the story gets more personal for her, doesn't it?
It does. Things take a difficult turn at home.
Yeah, this is where it gets really intense. Her husband brings another woman into the house, another wife.
Ooh, yeah.
I mean, think about that. In that time, in that society, what would that have meant for her?
Oh, it would likely have been a huge blow. Socially, emotionally, her security, her standing in the household, all threatened. It's completely understandable she'd be deeply distressed.
And the text tells us how she reacted.
It does. It says, upon hearing the news, feeling her home life was basically ruined, she just snapped. She got incredibly angry.
And who did she take it out on?
The monks. She started insulting them, reviling any monks she saw passing by.
Wow. So she goes from giving them food to yelling insults. That's quite a switch.
A complete reversal. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How often does deep personal pain or distress come out as anger, directed at people who have nothing to do with the original problem?
It's so common, isn't it? You feel wronged or overwhelmed and you just lash out, often at the easiest target.
Exactly. Her anger, which stemmed from her own family situation, spilled over onto the monks nearby.
And it had real consequences, right? It wasn't just her yelling into the void.
No, not at all. The text says monks actually became hesitant to even walk down her street anymore.
So her personal turmoil was directly affecting the community. The monks' daily alms round disrupted.
It shows how interconnected everything was. Her emotional state created these ripples outwards.
And it's this disruption, presumably, that brings the Buddha into the picture.
Precisely. The Buddha hears about what's happening Karjanli. Kāṇamātā scolding monks avoiding her street, and he decides to intervene directly.
He goes to her house himself.
Yes, which, shows his commitment to resolving conflict right at the source.
Okay, so the Buddha arrives. How does Kāṇamātā react to him, given her anger towards other monks?
Well, interestingly, she greets him respectfully, offers him a seat, even gives him some porridge she has.
Really? So despite being furious with monks in general, she treats the Buddha differently.
It seems so. It suggests she probably held the Buddha himself in very high regard. Maybe she saw him as separate or above the situation somehow. That underlying respect was still there, even through her anger.
Interesting. Okay, so he eats the porridge. Then what?
After the meal, he asks about her daughter, Kaj.
Focusing on the child first. That feels like a very gentle approach, doesn't it?
It does. Quite skillful, perhaps. Bringing up her daughter might shift the focus, maybe tap into her maternal feelings, her compassion.
And what does the mother say about Kāṇamātā?
Kāṇamātā explains that Kāṇamātā was hiding and crying. And why? Because she saw her mother yelling at the monks.
Oh, wow. So the daughter was aware of it all and was upset by it. That adds another whole layer, doesn't it? The impact on her own child.
Absolutely. It highlights how her actions weren't just affecting the monks, but her own family, her daughter's well-being. It really sets the stage for some self-reflection, you'd think.
So the Buddha then calls Kāṇa over.
Yes. He summons Kent and asks her directly, "Why were you hiding? Why were you crying when you saw me?"
He doesn't shy away from directness, even with a child.
No.
Yeah.
It seems characteristic, cutting through any potential confusion, getting right to the heart of the matter.
The mother explains again, and then the Buddha asks the mother a really crucial question.
Yes, this seems pivotal. He asks, "Did my disciples accept food that was given by you or food that was not given?"
Okay, why is that the key question here?
Because it goes right to the foundation of her anger at the monks. He's asking her to look objectively at their actions. What did they actually do?
Right, were they taking something they shouldn't have or just accepting what she offered?
Exactly. And Kāṇamātā has to admit, well, yes, they only accepted what was given.
And the Buddha's follow-up.
Pure logic. He basically says, okay, if they just accepted what you gave them at your door while on their alms round, what fault is it of theirs?
Ah, it just dismantles her justification for being angry at them. Very powerful.
Extremely. It exposes the misdirected nature of her anger.
And how does she respond to that logic?
It seems to work. She admits fault. She says, no, the monks weren't at fault. Although, interestingly, she then says, it was my daughter.
Still shifting blame slightly, but at least admitting the monks were innocent.
Yes, that's the key step, I think. Recognizing the monks weren't to blame. Then the Buddha turns to Kāṇa, the daughter, asks her about the food offering.
And she admits fault, too.
Yes, she admits her fault and apologizes to the Buddha. So we have this moment of acknowledgement and apology. A resolution seems possible.
It really does. And after this, the Buddha doesn't just leave, right? He teaches Kāṇa.
That's right. The text mentions anupubbikatha, which means gradual teaching, step-by-step instruction.
And this teaching has a profound effect on Kāṇa.
A huge effect. She attains the sotāpattiphala fruit, stream entry.
Okay, for listeners who might not know, what does stream entry mean in Buddhism?
Sotāpattiphala, or stream entry, is, well, it's considered the first major stage of awakening on the path to enlightenment. It means the person has had a direct glimpse of the true nature of reality, of the Nibbana, and they're now irreversibly on the path. They won't fall back, spiritually speaking.
Wow. So even as a child, through this gradual teaching, after all that turmoil, Kāṇa reaches this significant spiritual milestone.
It really highlights the effectiveness of the Buddha's method, doesn't it? Tailoring the teaching to the individual.
Absolutely. Okay, so the Buddha leaves the house. What happens next?
As he's leaving, he passes by the royal courtyard, and the king sees him.
The king? Okay.
Yes. The king shows great respect, asks the Buddha where he's been.
And the Buddha tells him?
Straight up. Kāṇamātā house. He explains that she'd been scolding monks.
Just like that. Tells the king. No beating around the bush.
Seems typical of the Buddha's straightforwardness. He addresses the issue openly.
So the king asks naturally, well, did you manage to stop her? Did you calm her down?
Yes, and the Buddha says he did. He says he made her stop scolding the monks. But then he adds something interesting. He describes her now as a mistress of a noble household. The Pali term is lokuraku umbasamani.
Lokuttara. That means super mundane or transcendent, right? So mistress of a spiritual household.
Exactly. It implies she's gained some kind of inner mastery, perhaps control over her negative emotions, her inner household of defilements, a spiritual nobility achieved through this whole encounter.
Okay, so the Buddha sees her transformation in spiritual terms. How does the king react to this?
The king's reaction is, well, quite different. He hears, mistress of a noble household. And he says, essentially, right, I'll make her a mistress of a worldly household. The Pali is lokiyaku umbasamani.
Lokia worldly. So he interprets it in terms of status and wealth.
It seems so. He takes these really dramatic steps. He basically adopts Kāṇa, the daughter.
Adopts her.
Yes. Sends a covered carriage, summons her, adorns her with all sorts of ornaments, declares her his eldest daughter, and says whoever can support his daughter can marry her.
Wow. That's quite an elevation in status for Kāṇa.
Huge. A chief minister, described as capable, steps up, takes her to his house, gives her complete authority over his wealth, and tells her to just do meritorious deeds as she pleases.
So Kāṇa goes from this distressed child, witnesses her mother's anger, attains stream entry, and suddenly becomes effectively royalty, married to a powerful minister with unlimited resources.
Quite the turn of events.
Yeah.
But there's a catch, isn't there? A consequence described in the text.
Ah, yes. What was that?
Because she now has all this wealth and status, she has attendants everywhere, guards at her 4 gates. And the result is she can no longer personally attend to monks and nuns like she might have before, perhaps like her mother did initially.
So she has this incredible abundance. The text says food flowed like a flood at her gates, but she loses that direct personal connection to the practice of giving alms.
Exactly. It illustrates this potential tension, maybe, between worldly success and direct personal spiritual engagement, a kind of trade-off.
That leads nicely into the next part where the monks are discussing all this.
Yes. Back in the Dhamma assembly, the monks are talking. They're saying, wow, look at this. First, those elderly monks inadvertently caused Kāṇamātā distress.
Right, by accepting the cakes maybe, or just by being there when she was upset.
The text implies their presence was the trigger for her outburst, even if they weren't at fault. So they caused her remorse. But then she meets the Buddha, gains faith.
And the Buddha sorts it out, makes her street accessible again.
Yes. But now, ironically, even though Kashe has all this wealth and could support monks and nuns lavishly, she's sort of insulated from them by her very status. She can't find monks or nuns to attend to personally.
They're marveling at the whole situation, and especially the Buddha's wisdom in navigating it all.
And just then, the Buddha arrives and asks what they're discussing.
They tell him, and what's his response?
He says, essentially, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. He says it wasn't just now that elderly monks caused her trouble, and it wasn't just now that he helped her find clarity. It happened before.
In a past life.
Exactly. The monks, naturally, ask him to tell the story.
And this leads to the Babu Jataka.
Yes. He tells this Jataka tale, a story from a past life. We don't have the full Jataka text here, but the summary connects it directly.
What's the gist of it in relation to Ka's story?
The Buddha identifies the key players, the 4 elderly monks from the present story. They were 4 cats in the Jataka.
Okay.
Kāṇamātā, the daughter. She was a mouse in that past life.
A mouse being troubled by 4 cats. I can see the parallel.
And the Buddha himself. He was a jeweler in that story who, presumably, helped the mouse. The verse mentioned for the Jataka is, where one finds a babu, cat, a second arises there, and a third and fourth. This is the abode of the babus. It emphasizes the recurring nature of the trouble.
So the Jataka is used to show this isn't a random event, but part of a longer pattern. That Kāṇamātā, even in the past as a mouse, had a troubled mind, but found clarity through his intervention.
Precisely. He's connecting past and present, showing a continuity. Then, after linking the Jataka, he teaches the Dhamma again, reciting another verse.
The one about the lake.
Yes. Just as a deep lake, clear and undisturbed, so do the wise become clear after hearing the teachings.
That's a beautiful image. Does he explain it further?
Oh yes, he unpacks it quite vividly. He describes this lake, Rahata, as being like a vast ocean, incredibly deep, 84,000 yojanas, a mythical measure of distance.
So deep it's not easily disturbed.
Exactly. Not even by a huge army wading in. He even breaks down the layers. The bottom part moves with fish, the top part moves with wind, but the middle part, thousands of yojanas deep, is perfectly still, undisturbed.
Wow. That stillness is key then.
Absolutely. And teachings clearly refers to the Dhamma. So the interpretation he gives is, just as that deep lake is clear because it's unagitated and undisturbed because it's perfectly still.
So the wise, after hearing the Dhamma, become clear-minded.
Yes. By attaining stages like stream entry, they become free from the mud of defilements. And those who reach arahantship, the final goal, are completely clear, completely undisturbed, like that deep, still water.
So the lake is a metaphor for the mind purified by wisdom, freed from the turbulence of greed, hatred, delusion.
A perfect summary. That's the core image. Clarity through stillness achieved by understanding the Dhamma.
And the story ends by saying, many people listening attain spiritual fruits from this teaching.
Yes. Many attain sotāpattiphala and other stages. It ends with the title, Vatthu, the end of Kāṇamātā's story.
Okay, quite a journey. So if we were to pull out the main insights from this deep dive, what would they be?
Well, first I think is the raw impact of our emotions. How anger and distress, like Kāṇamātā's, can really ripple outwards and affect our actions and relationships, often in unintended ways.
That really came through. What else?
Second, the sheer power of the Buddha's approach. His skillful means, his directness, his use of logic, and ultimately his teachings, the Dhamma, to bring clarity and transformation even in really messy emotional situations, like turning Kāṇamātā's anger around and guiding Kāṇamātā to stream entry.
The power of wisdom to cut through confusion.
Exactly. And maybe thirdly, that sense of interconnectedness. How actions lead to consequences, sometimes unexpected ones, like with the king's intervention. And the Jataka suggests this interconnectedness might even stretch across lifetimes.
Actions, consequences, past, present. It's all woven together.
That seems to be the implication, yes.
All right. So perhaps a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. Consider how much external events, like, say, a change in family circumstances, and your own internal state, anger, distress, peace, shape what you actually do.
Yeah.
And maybe reflect on that potential, the potential for seeking wisdom, for hearing the teachings, whatever form that takes for you, to lead towards that kind of deep inner clarity, that stillness, like that deep, undisturbed lake the Buddha described.
A powerful image to end on.
Indeed. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the story of Kāṇamātā.